And Stephen K. Peeples here. I'm with Marty Jourard and of the Motels. And in our last video in this series of interviews, we talked about the Motels' second album, Careful, which was released in 1980, and some of the touring that happened after that, including the summer 1980 tour with the Cars. And that 1980 was the most intense year for the band as far as touring. And after the summer tour with the Cars, you guys went to Australia and New Zealand and then Europe. So can you pick it up with after the Cars tour and what happened with the band getting ready to go to Europe?
Sure.
Australia, excuse me.
Yeah. All I can say looking back now is that I'm glad I was 26 years old when I was doing all that, because you couldn't do it at my age and live. What I have here is we did that whole Cars tour, which was long. And oddly enough, at one point in that, October 9th, we were in Oklahoma City on that tour, and Elton John was playing, and we got to see Elton John. And the guitar player in Elton John was this guy called Richie Zito, who we had no idea was going to produce Shock in 4 years from then. All we did is see Elton, and wow, Elton was great.
It's Motels' fifth album for Capitol.
Yeah, our last one, Capitol. But we came off that Cars tour, which is, I think, the biggest summer tour in LA at the time, the Cars tour in 1980. We had a week off, and then we flew from LA to Auckland, New Zealand at the end of October 1980. And I mean, we played all over there. When I say all over, there's only about 6 places you can play in Australia, because it's this giant hollow country. It's like you play the edges. There's really nothing in the middle that you could go to. Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, those places.
Well,
then
both the first 2 records did really well down under.
They did. That's the great thing about Capitol, which was really EMI, which was it was the mother label that would put our albums out and other albums all around the world. And if a country liked it, then they promote that country. I mean, we had a minor hit in Italy, but that's another story. But the coolest thing about this is we left from Perth. It was the longest flight we'd ever had. It was 24 hours of travel.
Wow.
We went from Perth to Bombay to London, and then waited in London. Then we flew to Amsterdam. And all I knew is, like, I woke up in Perth, and then 24 hours later, I was in a hotel room in Amsterdam, and that was straight through, just travel, travel, travel. I think it was the longest flight you could do back then, or at least, from Perth to Bombay was a real mother. And then we went to Brussels, and we did the Old Grey Whistle test. And the other band was Dire Straits. Remember that? They played Romeo and Juliet.
Huh.
And we did some TV, and we went to Stockholm, and then we played England. And by that time, I had a low-grade flu, and I felt like shit. But we played anyway. And the last gig we did was in Rome. And then we flew back to LA, and we played December 31st. We came back like on the 20th of December. And then our last gig was at the Country Club in LA. That was in Reseda. And I remember it being New Year's. I had this accordion. I got it at a thrift shop, and I played Auld Lang Syne on the accordion really badly, and it was big fun. And that was 1980. That was the most, in my life, the most intense musical experience and traveling experience as a musician that I'd ever had. It was a long time ago, but I remember much of it.
Well, so what kind of shape was the band in at the end of all of this, at the end of the year?
I know that Michael Goodrow got an ulcer the size of a nickel, he told me, in his stomach, because we were just drinking all this cognac, and we were partying our butts off. We were young and we were on tour, and he ended up quitting drinking then forever. And he was taking Tagamet for a year. He just drank ginger ale at bars. I just had a flu and was just burned out. I mean, we were like many bands. We were just smoking. It wasn't even illegal stuff. The cigarettes were so good in Europe. These Dunhills and Rothmans, and the cognac was better than anything you could even buy in the U.S. So we were recovering. Basically recovering back then was I'd sit in the backyard of my little rental house in Tarzana and do nothing for a day, and because I was in one place for a whole day. And it's just that constant moving. There's a little part in your mind when you tour, it's always on alert because you've never been in this place before, and now you're traveling. And when it takes about a week for that to just stop being that little muscle in your head to just relax and go, you're in your house now. And it's like a carousel that you get off. I'm not complaining, I'm just describing it.
Understood.
Yeah. And then according to my,
well, so the second album didn't really take off.
no.
And so what was the mindset going into the third album? What was the idea? There was a change in producers from John Carter, who produced the first two, to Val Garay.
Yeah.
So how did all of that transpire?
My theory is that Capitol noticed that we've had two albums that didn't do terrible, but critically they were done well, but they didn't sell. And Val Garay was the producer of the moment in Los Angeles. It was Betty Davis Eyes that did it. He produced Betty Davis Eyes, and I believe the single sold 9 million worldwide. It certainly was a number one for a long time, I think, in the US, and it was a worldwide hit.
And that was on EMI America here. And so it was, again, part of the whole EMI Combine that Garay was involved with at that point.
I believe Val he already had massive commercial success with that. And he had heard, he's been around a long time, that the Motels were this hip little group, but they couldn't cut a hit. And he just cut a hit. And he wanted to move from being an engineer, and he had been an engineer before Betty Davis Eyes on Linda Ronstadt albums and many albums. He worked with Peter Asher as the engineer.
Right.
So this was a move for him. And Capitol thought, well, what's not to like? You've got Val Garay. He's got this. Betty Davis Eyes was a huge hit, and he's now going to produce the Motels. And at that time, if you had a well-known producer, if a band was produced by a well-known producer, you would get attention from the industry just from that alone. Even if the album was a dud, this person did it. Now, we talked to Roy Thomas Baker and Albie Galutin and some other producers that wanted to produce us. But I think we figured Roy Thomas Baker, it would sound like a Cars album, and Albie Galutin had worked with the Bee Gees. I don't know what we were really thinking. We probably weren't. But along came Val, and Capitol was happy with it. And so I notice here, March 81, it says record 1, 2 p.m. That means we went to Val's studio, and Tim was in the band, and we proceeded to cut what was Apocalypso. And I know we've talked about Apocalypso, that album. And the only notes that are really of interest, even to me, are August 9th, finished album. That's on a Sunday. And then Friday of that very week, the 14th, 5:30, Capitol didn't like album. That's my note.
Okay, obviously, so what happened from there? What was your reaction, and what was the band's reaction, and what was the decision to do?
We were under the impression that they wanted us to recut one song. I think it was Only the Lonely. They thought that might be a hit, but maybe we should recut it. But what they were saying is, we don't like the record, period. And as I'd mentioned in a previous interview, we can put it out, but the promotional staff isn't hopping up and down to promote this. It's fairly artsy, and they're not going to really promote it. So we could put it out, but you really want it to be put out and not be promoted? Because if we'd insisted, they would have put it out and would have probably just disappeared. Like
they would have ignored it, basically.
Yeah, or well, they wouldn't have shelved it. But meanwhile, we had a tour to do, and we were playing, and so I see all these notes about rehearsing in 1981. And we played the LA Greek Theater. Now, I don't want to get too, behind the scenes, the whole, we're musicians, we're talking about albums, but the stuff going on between Martha and Tim was getting intense. And we played the Greek Theater October 17th. And I remember Don Waller, who was a really cool guy. He's passed away, but he was a writer, a music critic for the LA Times. The headline for that was Histrionic Davis Leads Motels. And he said Martha did this and that, and she cried not once but twice, and just thought that Martha was putting this all on as an act. But in fact, some heavy stuff was going on behind the scenes in her personal life between her and Tim, and it came out, and that was that. So things got a little bubbly in terms of the lineup. And I know that November 10th, Tim leaves the Motels. That's 1981. Meanwhile, I broke up with my girlfriend, and that's how Take the L came along. Another gift from romance. And at the end of December, we're just rehearsing. December 81. And where it picked up from there, which would probably be 1982, wouldn't it?
It would follow, yes.
Yeah, it does. I'm trying to see where we started working again with Val. Oh, this finished album. Oh, here you go. We left that. We did this. We Apocalypso, Blasters. Oh, yeah. We started recording in January of 82, really working on the record. I'm trying to figure out if I've got these dates straight.
Well, if you're talking about All for One, it'd be 81.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out when we started to recut the record. I don't think
the Greek was on October 17th, 81.
Okay, I found it. So in December 81, very soon after Tim left the band, because it's time to do something new, and Tim was very dominant on Apocalypso. In December 81, I just see rehearse Take the L, rehearse Mission of Mercy, rehearse this. So we cut Take the L in one take, and I was happy for about 2 weeks after that. Now, the way that happened is the band, I augmented with the players that were also on All for One, the ones that are listed as additional musicians. The drummer, Craig Cramp, really took to me, wanted me to, he kind of knew how things went in the politics of getting a song on a record. And he liked Take the L. So we rehearsed it, and we cut it live, and we cut it one time. And at the end, Val said, that's the take. So it was done in one live take, and we didn't try to beat it. We just played it once. And what you hear is the first time and the only time it was ever played. And then there were overdubs on it, but the master was, the rhythm track was cut in one take. And I have like 5 exclamation points at the end of that in my diary, because it doesn't usually happen. And then on goes rehearsing, and I guess, yeah, at the beginning of 82, I say finished the album in February of 82, February 28th. And I think we did a little bit of overdub something on My Forever Mine. I could go through vast detail, but we were done with the record. Remixed He Hit Me, that's in March. There's this album released April 5th. And then we did a little mini tour. And at one point we auditioned guitar players. And we auditioned Scott Thurston on May of 82. And I have a list of these guitar players we were trying out, various people. One of them was the guy that played guitar on Salisbury Hill on Peter Gabriel's album. And we were so excited about that all we did was play Salisbury Hill for about 20 minutes with him to try him out. And it didn't quite work out with him. And one of those people was Guy Perry, because we needed somebody to play this album that had many overdubs on it. And he joined the band to replace Tim, who had been gone for a while. And then we got Scott to come in. And then we had a touring band then. We had the lineup. It was a 6-piece then. It had always been a 5-piece before that.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, there's like the big gap between in 82 and the tour schedule, 81 rather, in the tour schedule, between the midnight special gig at the end of January and the next gig, which was at Club Lingerie in October, and that was a self-booked gig. What was the story there? Now you guys had already done Apocalypso, you'd been through the mill with the record label, you're working on re-recording tracks, try to figure out the path forward, and then you play this gig.
I arranged that gig. I used to sit in with Fast Freddy and the Precisions all the time on saxophone, me and Steve Berlin, who was in Los Lobos. I think he was in Los, no, I don't know if he was yet. Anyhow, I would just sit in because he played R&B, and a lot of people thought that I was really just this guy that played with Fast Freddy and the Precisions because I played with them wherever they play. But I played Club Lingerie a lot. It was the hippest club around at that time.
Yep.
And I thought, I want us to do a show with, just play a show. And I went in and booked it, and because we never got money at the end of a show or a tour delivered to us. This was a thing where we each got paid just like we were playing in a club, and you got paid cash at the end. So we did it, and it was a surprise gig of some sort, but of course it leaked out. And we played, and I guess it was really good. It was very packed. And at the end of the night, I went and talked to the guy, and he gave me all this cash. It's all cash. And I gave everybody, I think each person got $274.48. And it was very gratifying because it was just, we were right there playing and getting paid. It all happened in one evening. And I think I still have the adding machine tape for that somewhere, but that was something for us, just to play, because we didn't have a way to play otherwise. We were out of the
you hadn't played a live gig in almost 9 months or 10 months.
Oh, well, see, you know that, and I didn't notice that.
Considering that in the previous year, pretty much every date or every day was at least one gig that you had to play. It was very intense, and then all of a sudden, bam! As you're working on the third album, there's this huge 9-month gap. So I can imagine you guys were chomping at the bit to play.
We were chomping, and we chomped.
Or champing, as the case may be.
That is the technical term. That's true. Champing, nobody chomps at the bit, they champ, but
yes,
that's a Grammarly problem.
Yes.
So that's a lot to cover before we get to the actual songs.
Yeah. Well, it's all context, right?
Yeah.
It's all, I think, important. So yeah, let's get into the songs and then talk about, there was some disagreement or some conflict between Tim and Val that transpired during the sessions that had, that factored in. So can we perhaps go through the songs, and maybe you can amplify the background on some of these things?
Sure. I don't think there was a conflict between Val and Tim. My experience of it was that Val thought, this is a piece of cake. I can just sit back and let this very creative guitar player in this band do his, I mean, he wasn't the only person contributing on, what was Apocalypso, but he was very dominant, and he had ideas, and we followed them. I mean, this is the back. I took all of these SX70s myself. There's Tim, and there's Michael, and somewhere in the back there's Brian.
Nice.
He thought, this is great. This is going to be a real artsy album, and it's going to sell great. And I'm pretty much just engineering it, even though it says I'm producing it. There wasn't a conflict, but once Capitol said this ain't going to happen, Val realized that nothing's going to come of this unless he comes in and produces it in his way.
Yeah, he has to take more of a hands-on role.
Yes, well, he did. And that's the difference between Apocalypse and All for One.
Well, and there was some lineup changes in some of the songs and recording as a result. There were some studio guys that were brought in to replace some of the tracks that had been previously recorded by band members. Is that right?
That's right. But the songs were radically different. If the arrangements were radically different, but the way, it's hard to understand this if you're not in a band and it's not the 80s. Somebody would say to you, well, hey, couldn't you just tell the producers, screw you, I don't want these other people playing on this. This is a band. Or if Martha said, this is the band and nobody else can play. It's not that easy. About the only thing I could do was quit. Just quit the Motels. And I'm just cutting to it. So it might clear up a little of this, how could you let that happen or whatever. I wasn't letting anything happen. I was there. You find out very quickly who's got power and who doesn't in a situation when you go, who can fire who? And if your only option is to quit, and you don't want to quit, you go along with it. So there were other players, and these were players that were, it was essentially the band that backed Kim Carnes, which wasn't really a band. It was these players. As I said, there was the Malibu Mafia, they called it, these professional Southern California players, and you can go through all of them. The guy that played with James Taylor and Don Henley, that guitar player, he's one of them. These are really good players. So they all had worked together anyway. It was the greasiest way to just go in and say, okay, these guys have played together so much, I don't have to introduce them to each other. And they did play. Craig played most of the drums, Craig Cranf, but he could not figure out how to do the intro to Apocalypso. He could not get that feel that Brian had. And so the beginning of Apocalypso was Brian. He tried, but Brian had this rotary way of playing, tumbling down a hill thing. And Craig was much more of a 16th note, 32nd note, whatever you want. I can divide notes in half like a machine. And that's what studio players need to do. They need to be like a metronome. Michael Goodrow played every note of bass on everything. In fact, he was so scared that he would be, we're going to try somebody else, that sometimes we take a lunch break and he would stay in the studio with the bass in his hands and the headphones on while we took lunch. Now, he was overreacting a little bit. That happened.
You'll take the bass out of my cold, dead hands.
Right. And now I don't want to drill down too much because I believe All for One is a superior album.
Yes.
In all ways. There's nothing wrong with making a song. Nobody complained that Stevie Wonder songs were commercial. I'm not comparing us to Stevie Wonder, but this is a much better crafted record. And this imaginary guy was just the four of us. There's Guy Perry and me here, and there's Brian Glascock. And some people thought that this was some really weird guy that we took a picture of. I don't know where they came up with that. It was just all 4-1.
This is still shot from the movie Freaks. That was
yeah.
Could
be.
All right. Well, let's go through the tracks if we could, and tell me a little bit about the writing, whatever you know about the writing and the production. In the case of Mission of Mercy, there was a Martha and Marty co-write.
No, that was a Martha Davis song. I co-wrote "Take the L" with her. I basically came up with most of it, but Mission of Mercy was a total Martha Davis song. And
yeah, what is the credit? What does the album credit say?
Martha Davis.
Just Martha Davis.
Yeah, because just Martha Davis wrote the song.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's just, what can I say? It's a cool song. It's a rocker. You start a song, unless you want to be a Quiet Storm album, you want to, if you're a rock band, you start with a rocker. You might get something mid-tempo in there, but you want to set the mood that, yeah, we're a rock band. And it was a great song. I had this little boink boink part. It wasn't that much different than, radically different than the one we had on Apocalypso, but it was different. So it's just a rocking song. The lyrics speak for themselves. I'm not going to try to analyze them, but
yeah, no, no, it's necesario.
And we still play that song.
Yeah, I was going to say that's still one of the tunes in the sets, and so is "Take the L."
Yeah,
the second track on the set. Now that you had definitely more to do with. You talked about that a little bit earlier.
Well, people break up with their girlfriends, and I broke up with mine, and I was complaining to Carter about it, whining on the phone one night, and he said, "Well, take the L out of lover and it's over." That would be a good song title. And I thought it was the corniest thing I'd ever heard. It sounded like an old country song, like a 78 or something that you'd find, a little fiddle tune. And then I thought about it, and it was clever. And I have to say, I've gotten credit for being clever to come up with that, but I did not come up with that. However, I wrote the song, and I was influenced by "To Pay You Back with Interest" by the Hollies. If you listen to "Pay You Back with Interest" by the Hollies, it's got this intro that's like sort of like this. It goes like, and then he starts singing. So I thought, well, boom, 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 and I came up with ba da da da. and all those little twiddle things. And I just tried to create the imagery of somebody breaking up with somebody. And this was not a song this was coming from my feelings. It wasn't something I crafted out of thin air. And I know that if that song has that, then it comes across to people that it was the genuine emotion created the song, and people can feel that if it's sincere. It's not trying to create an emotion. Because I was kind of bummed out.
The woman in question, did she ever hear the song? Did you ever get a reaction from her about it?
No, but I do remember I was living with her in that little house in Tarzana. And it was a 2-bedroom, and they were separated with a wall. And she was trying to go to sleep in the bedroom, and I was pounding away on this, trying to figure out the chorus. And the other one, she was saying, "Stop playing."
So you hadn't split up yet. You were just in the process, I guess.
I guess we were. I mean, this isn't even interesting. You break up, you sort it together, you sort of this. It wasn't headed for the wedding chapel. I'll put it that way.
Gotcha.
But the song came out, and Martha helped me with the order of the chords and the chorus, and we put it together and recorded it in one take. That's all I can tell you. It was really a pleasure to do it that way, and it's by far the most successful or appreciated song I've written. I'm not prolific, but that was the one that has left a mark, and we play it every show.
Right.
People like it.
And Only the Lonely, probably one of the 2 or 3 biggest Motels hits.
Mm-hmm. Well, we cut it. It sounded like on Apocalypso. It sounded like a surf song. It had some real dreamy stuff on it. Different beat, different everything. But this was a case where Val Garay's approach paid off handsomely, and it was the right approach for this. What I contributed to it was the sax solo, of course, but the intro was a Prophet sound, a synthesizer sound, and all I was doing was copying Martha playing it on guitar, and she had this parallel thing going. That I'm reaching for a piano, folks. That thing, she did that on guitar. So I turned it into a piano riff. In other words, those 2 notes, it isn't common in a song. And I turned it into a piano part, and on Apocalypso, it was a piano thing. I'm kind of pounding away on a piano. But then I came up with that sound from a Prophet. I just twiddled it and got that. And it's very hard to get it. It has this certain sound that either you get it or you don't. We're pretty close on the unit I have now, because it's still a Prophet, but it's a different design.
Huh.
Val bumped it up a half a step from G to G sharp, because it would give a little more tension to Martha's voice, or whatever it did. And it took me about an hour in the corner of the studio to transpose it. I wasn't super bright at doing that. Now I realized I could have turned a knob on the synth and just said it play it a half step higher. But I didn't know that. So I worked it out. So we did that, and the sax solo went through a bunch of iterations. At one point I was playing it on tenor. And then when we finally got to record it, I wanted to go to the high note that was a half step lower, a major 7th. And they all said, well, why don't you just go all the way up to the key of the song, like the high note, the money shot, as we call it. And I did, but I played it slightly flat. And there's this unit called a harmonizer. It was a digital unit that you could dial into something, and it would just change the pitch. So I think they put it on 1.01 to get it I was probably a quarter tone flat, and that nailed it. And then I played the outro, and that was the song. And Martha came up with that do 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 do, that little outro hook, and I played it, but she came up with it. She's quite melodic. And that's the story of the song. And that was the one that they asked Martha, which do you think should be the single? And she goes, I think that should. And I think Capitol thought that anyway. And it did. And
that was good. Everybody was on the same page on that, because it really put the band on the map. Seriously. There was a video involved also.
Mm-hmm. And it went to number 9, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
That's just in the top 10.
Next song, Art Fails. Tim McGovern, did he?
Yeah, it was a Tim and Martha thing, and this is also an Apocalypso version.
Right.
It was a little more free form. This time, that keyboard thing, bum 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 bum. I've repeated that. I was doing all kinds of diddly dee stuff before. It was just more organized, and it's just she's talking about art fails, just all kinds of things that are failing. But I don't want to see you this way. And I played basically that lick over and over again, and just let the song be arranged as it was to be arranged. Pretty simple. It doesn't have a lot of chords.
And then Change My Mind.
Yeah. Now this is a co-write with Steve Goldstein, the late great Steve Goldstein. I told you I was jealous of him because he's very good, but unfortunately he's not here with us to talk about it. That was just a straight blues. Martha's a good blues singer. She could make a blues album. And I was playing sax on that. I had listened to Goodbye Pork Pie Hat by Charles Mingus.
Yeah, Mingus, right.
And I don't know if it's Grover Washington Jr. or I don't know who plays the tenor solo on that, but it just blew my mind. I mean, just go listen to Charles Mingus' Goodbye Pork Pie Hat and listen to that sax solo. I wanted to sound like that. So I just tried to emulate that. And I also knew that the style in jazz ballads is the voice would sing a line and then the sax would play a response or fill. I mean, this is just the way it is back then. And you don't play sax or trumpet over the singing, you wait. And so that was just what I did. I did these little fills in the background.
Right.
And I was quite inspired by the song. It was beautiful chords. And just it took a few takes to cut it, but we got it.
You got it. And then
beautiful.
So LA. So LA.
Yeah, we say that a lot.
So LA.
That is so LA. Oh yeah. So I bring these little worms to the Richie Zito, call them worms. Play a keyboard worm, worm. And I knew the title was So LA, and I just came with bum 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 bum. So LA. So it was 3-syllable keyboard part. Right. Maybe I was thinking of the NBC. I was thinking of the NBC thing. Who knows? Who cares? But
well, that sounded like the intro to the other song, the bum 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 bum.
Yeah, it could be.
Bum, 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 bum.
But yeah, So LA, yeah, down, and just a real thrasher. We play that all the time too.
Yep,
that's off and open. It's just a good song. Martha wrote that one all by herself.
Tragic Surf is it? Did Tim? It's another Tim and Martha co-write.
Tim and Martha one. That was a real goof. She was trying to do one of these, those songs where she's in love, somebody's in love with Johnny, and they get hit by a car at some,
Last Kiss.
Yeah, Last Kiss, and many of those. Well, she was trying to do it, but this time the guy's surfing and he wipes out instead of getting in a car wreck or some kind of a chicken race with hot rods. So that's about all it was. It was pretty funny. We didn't really, when Tim was in the band, of course we played it, but once he was not, we dropped it. It was I call it a novelty number.
Gotcha.
A little tongue in cheek.
And Apocalypso, the title track of the ill-fated precursor to All for One.
Yes. That had this little cha-cha-cha drum machine going. And this was the one that nobody could play what Brian came up with in the intro. And the intro to that was taken from the Apocalypso version and spliced on. But I had this flute sound on the Prophet, and I was just diddling away with all that stuff at the beginning. It sounds like a flute, but it's really a Prophet with a little tone bender. And there's a lot more noodling on the original version, but on this version, when we recut it with Val, it came out that way. And I really enjoyed playing sax on that. It's when you have to play a solo on a really good song, you really, really try, and you come up with ideas that are inspired by the song. I've never been able to play a solo on a song that I don't like or I don't think is good. It just, but that was one where I was inspired. And
well, you have to hear it up here first, I think, and feel it in here.
Yes, because especially saxophone or a wind instrument. Because you're producing it from your body, your air, just like a singer.
Right. We have 4 minutes and 2 more songs. So he hit me, and it felt like a kiss. This is a Goffin King song. This is kind of an anomaly for a Motels album.
Well, this is an example where being ironic doesn't come across. the last thing, Martha, it was encouraging is that if somebody hits you, they're really kissing you. And this came about from Eva. It was Carole King and Jerry Goffin's nanny. And she did the locomotion.
Right.
She
Little
inspired
Eva.
that. So it was, he hit me and it felt like a kiss, and we just like the music of it. It changes key for the verse and the solo and so on. And I played maracas on it. Me and Craig Cramp, these ones, you'll hear it in between. It was so fun to do that. We did it with our fingers and drumsticks. Forever Mine, one of the few happy songs Martha admits she ever wrote. And I really liked that song a lot.
It's a sweet love song. It's very nice.
Yeah, we don't play it anymore. But what I did in this was I played this keyboard solo, and I was thinking of Games People Play by Joe South. I was trying to do this real funky keyboard solo, just R&B. And it came out really cool. And I said, I want to double that on baritone sax, completely double it. And I bought a baritone sax. And so I went home and I played along with it for about an hour until I could do it. And then the next day I came in and said, Val, I can do this. Run the tape and I'll show you. And of course I played it and he goes, yeah. And it was identical, but you're hearing oh gee, I guess it's a polymoog playing it, a harpsichord sound and a baritone sax. And I was hoping that you couldn't tell which it was if you mix them together, because it's just in unison. And thus ends All for One.
Very nice, very nice. And the videos we talked about, there was one for Only the Lonely. Do you remember that video shoot?
Of course. Yeah, we went downtown LA. There was some variety arts theater, I think it was called. And they did these cabarets and this English music hall stuff. And on the top, they had like a 20-foot copy of the Queen Mary on the top of this building, a big metal thing. There's a scene where Martha's throwing confetti or something, and it's up there. And the whole bar scene, which is out of that ridiculous movie, what's the one at the hotel, Jack Nicholson, that the crazy bar scene.
Sorry.
Well, we're both old. We forget the name of it.
Yes.
Anyhow, I remember doing that, and that was somewhere down in downtown LA. This was done quickly, and it was Russell Mulcahy did that one. And then he did, a week later, we did Take the L, very inexpensively. And this was before he became a big movie producer. He really knew what he's doing, Russell Mulcahy. And we cut them quickly. And those were the two, Take the L and Only the Lonely. And those were the singles.
Yeah.
Only the Lonely went to 9. I think Take the L went to 52 or something, but those are the ones that were promoted. That was the first year of MTV. So we lucked out by having a great video director, because they got a lot of play, both of those.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
And they really did help visually spread the word across the world in a way that the records and reach places that the records even didn't reach. So it was a brilliant timing for all the way around. Marty, wanted to thank you again for spending some time with us, and we covered album number 3. And I encourage folks to go to martyjourard.com and Jourard.com and check out the next interview in our series, which will be Little Robbers.
Yeah. Thanks for talking to me.
My pleasure.